Before going into detailed version of this video, it is divided into 4 acts. These acts are further divided into subparts. Thus, outlook of each act is described as Act 1, the illusion. Why most people misunderstand success. Part 1A, the myth of talent and luck. Part 1, but why hard work stops working. Down in Part 1, the virality trap. And Part 1, down structure versus effort. Act 2, done, the machine. How the $500 million system actually works. Part 2A, attention as capital. Part 2B, reinvestment loops. Part 2C, time compression. Part 2D, feedback and scale. Part 2E, why the system is unstoppable. Act 3, so the transfer, how this applies to you. Part 3, Eton, you don't need fame. Part 3B, building systems without employees. And Part 3C, income versus wealth. Part 3D, the silent divide. Act 4, compounding and CTA from income to freedom. Part 4, Eton, why compounding is the final skill. Part 4B, long-term wealth psychology. Part 4, end-screen transition, power of compounding. The illusion. Part 1A, the myth of talent and luck. Pause before we begin, because this is the moment where most people misunderstand everything that follows. When people look at extraordinary success, their minds instinctively reach for explanations that feel safe. They say things like talent, luck, timing, or being in the right place at the right time. These explanations are not accidental. They are psychological defenses. They protect people from confronting a more uncomfortable truth, that success on this scale is rarely accidental, and that misunderstanding it has consequences. From an early age, most people are trained to see the world through a talent-based lens. We are told that some people are naturally gifted, while others are average. That some individuals are simply born with something special. This narrative feels fair. It explains inequality without forcing anyone to examine systems, structures, or incentives. If someone succeeds massively, talent becomes the explanation. And if someone struggles, the absence of talent becomes the excuse. But talent is one of the weakest explanations for dominance in modern systems. The internet has exposed this more clearly than any era before it. Never in history have so many talented people had access to distribution. Never before have intelligence, creativity, and skill been so easy to showcase. And yet outcomes remain brutally unequal. Millions of talented individuals produce content, businesses, and ideas every day, while only a tiny fraction ever escape financial fragility. That should tell you something important. Talent explains small differences. It does not explain compounding dominance. If talent were the primary driver, we would expect to see gradual proportional outcomes. Slightly better talent would produce slightly better results. But that is not what we observe. What we observe instead is exponential separation. A small number of people pull away dramatically, while everyone else clusters near the middle. This pattern does not come from talent. It comes from systems. Luck is the second illusion people cling to. Luck is comforting because it removes responsibility from analysis. If someone was lucky, then there is nothing to study, nothing to replicate, nothing to change. Luck turns success into a lottery rather than a process. But luck does not scale repeatedly over years. Luck does not produce consistency. And luck does not create feedback loops that improve with every cycle. When people attribute massive outcomes to luck, what they are really saying is that they do not understand the mechanism. And when mechanisms are not understood, they are dismissed. That dismissal is costly, because systems do not wait for understanding. They continue operating regardless of who is paying attention. There is a subtle danger in believing success is about talent or luck. It trains people to focus on what they are rather than what they build. They ask, am I good enough? Instead of, is this structured correctly? They obsess over personal qualities instead of environmental leverage. Over time, this mindset quietly caps growth, because identity does not compound. Systems do. Here is where discomfort begins. If success is not primarily about talent, then the ceiling most people feel is not a personal limitation. It is a structural one. And structural limits do not respond to motivation. They respond to redesign. This is why so many intelligent, capable people feel stuck despite effort. They are pushing harder inside containers that were never designed to scale. They upgrade skill while ignoring structure. They optimize effort while neglecting leverage. And when progress stalls, they blame themselves rather than the architecture they are operating within. Luck and talent narratives also distort time perception. People imagine success as a moment rather than a process. They wait for a break instead of building inevitability. Waiting feels easier than designing systems. Hope feels safer than responsibility. But hope does not compound. Design does. This is where the real divide begins. Not between smart and dumb, or talented and untalented, but between those who understand systems and those who live inside them unconsciously. The former study flow, feedback, and reinforcement. The latter focus on outcomes and wonder why effort feels unrewarded. There is also an emotional component people rarely acknowledge. Believing in talent and luck protects self-worth. If success is innate or random, then failure does not require structural introspection. But this protection comes at a cost. It keeps people from asking the only questions that matter in a systems-driven economy. Questions like what repeats here, what improves with scale, what gets stronger the more it runs, what breaks under pressure, and what thrives. These are not talent questions. They are system questions. At this stage, many people feel a subtle resistance. They think this sounds abstract. They want something practical, something actionable. But abstraction is necessary before precision. You cannot fix what you misdiagnose. And most people misdiagnose success at the very beginning. Because the truth is, the system we are examining did not emerge from talent or luck. It emerged from an obsession with structure, iteration, and feedback. And once that obsession took hold, outcomes became predictable rather than surprising. This leads us to the next illusion, one even more deeply embedded than talent or luck. The belief that hard work is the ultimate equalizer. The idea that effort alone will eventually be rewarded. This belief is emotionally powerful, culturally reinforced, and increasingly outdated. And once we dismantle that belief, something uncomfortable but freeing begins to happen. The focus shifts away from exhaustion and toward design, away from hustle and toward leverage, away from personal strain and toward systems that operate whether you are present or not. That is where the real story begins. The illusion continue. Part 1b. Why hard work stops working. For most people, hard work is not just a strategy. It is an identity. From an early age, effort is framed as virtue. You are told that if you work harder than others, you will eventually be rewarded. This belief becomes deeply emotional because it ties self-worth to exertion. Long hours feel noble. Exhaustion feels meaningful. And struggle feels like progress. But in modern systems, this belief quietly turns into a trap. Hard work does produce results, but only up to a point. It produces income, not leverage. It produces movement, not acceleration. And most importantly, it produces diminishing returns. Each additional unit of effort yields less impact than the one before it. This is not because the person is failing. It is because effort does not scale in environments designed around systems. The industrial era rewarded hard work because output was directly tied to physical presence. More hours meant more production. More production meant more pay. But digital systems operate under entirely different rules. Here, a single decision can outperform 1,000 hours of labor. A well-designed process can replace years of repetitive effort. And a system, once built, continues producing even when the builder steps away. This is where confusion begins. People work harder than ever before and feel like they are falling behind. They stay busy but do not feel ahead. They earn more nominally but feel poorer structurally, and instead of questioning the framework, they push harder inside it. They optimize the wrong variable. Effort is linear. Systems are exponential. This is not a motivational statement. It is a mathematical one. When effort is the primary input, time becomes the bottleneck. There are only so many hours in a day, only so much energy in a week, only so much focus in a year. Eventually, progress slows not because ambition fades, but because biology intervenes. Burnout is not a personal failure. It is a predictable outcome of scaling effort in a system that rewards leverage. This is why two people with similar intelligence and work ethic can end up in radically different places. One remains trapped in effort-based loops, constantly trading time for money. The other designs processes that detach output from presence. Over time, the gap widens until it feels inexplicable, but it is not. One is compounding, the other is surviving. There is a subtle cruelty in effort-based systems. They reward visible struggle more than invisible design. People who work quietly on structure are often underestimated. They do not look busy. They do not signal effort. They do not perform exhaustion. And because of that, they are often ignored until the results become impossible to overlook. Hard work also creates a psychological blind spot. When people believe effort is the solution, they stop looking for better questions. They ask how to do more instead of how to do differently. They assume the problem is quantity, not architecture. This is why hustle culture is so persistent. It feels productive, even when it is ineffective. Another danger of relying on hard work is that it conditions people to accept fragility. When income depends on constant effort, stability becomes an illusion. The moment effort stops, income stops. Illness, burnout, market shifts, or automation immediately threaten survival. This creates chronic anxiety even at higher income levels. People may earn well, but they never feel secure. Systems-based thinking changes this entirely. It reframes work as a temporary phase, not a permanent condition. Effort is applied up front to build structures that reduce future effort. The goal is not to work less immediately, but to make future work optional. That optionality is where freedom begins. Here is where many people resist. They think that moving away from hard work implies laziness, but the opposite is true. Systems thinking requires more discipline, not less. It requires delayed gratification. It requires patience. It requires the humility to build things that do not pay off immediately. Most people would rather grind visibly than build invisibly. There is also a cultural reason hard work remains glorified. It is easy to measure. Hours worked, tasks completed, output produced. Systems are harder to see. Their value is indirect at first. Their payoff is delayed. And in a culture addicted to immediate feedback, delayed payoff feels uncomfortable. But discomfort is often a signal of leverage forming. This is why modern wealth increasingly flows toward those who understand design, automation, and feedback loops. Not because they avoid work, but because they apply it strategically. They work once where others work repeatedly. They decide where others execute. They build where others consume. As technology accelerates, this divide will intensify. Automation does not eliminate effort. It eliminates low-leverage effort. Those who rely exclusively on hard work will feel increasing pressure. Those who rely on systems will feel increasing relief. The difference will not be dramatic at first. It will be subtle, quiet, almost invisible, until suddenly it is not. At this point, a question should be forming in your mind. If hard work is no longer the ultimate equalizer, and talent and luck are insufficient explanations, then what actually determines who escapes and who remains trapped? The answer lies in how people relate to visibility, recognition, and growth. It lies in how they respond when attention arrives. And it lies in a trap so common that most people fall into it willingly. The trap of virality.
Part 1. C. The virality trap.
There is a moment in nearly every modern success story where people point to a single event and say, that's where everything changed. A viral video, a breakout post, a sudden surge of attention. This moment is often treated as the cause of success rather than a symptom of something deeper. And that misunderstanding quietly misleads millions of people into chasing the wrong thing. Virality is seductive because it promises speed. It suggests that years of effort can be compressed into days. It feeds the fantasy that progress can be skipped rather than built. And for a short time, virality delivers on that promise. Attention spikes, numbers surge, validation arrives. But what happens next is where the real story begins and where most people are unprepared. Attention is volatile, and it arrives suddenly and leaves just as quickly. Without structure, virality does not stabilize growth. It destabilizes it. Expectations rise faster than capability. Pressure increases before systems exist. Decisions are made emotionally rather than strategically. This is why so many viral moments end not in momentum, but in confusion. People rarely talk about the psychological cost of virality. When attention arrives faster than understanding, identity becomes entangled with performance. The creator begins to chase the feeling rather than the process. Each new piece of content is measured against the high watermark of the viral moment. When results normalize, it feels like failure, even if progress is being made. This emotional distortion causes people to abandon systems prematurely. There is also a financial illusion embedded in virality. Sudden attention often brings sudden income. An income without structure creates false confidence. Money is spent before it is understood. Lifestyle upgrades replace reinvestment. Capacity remains unchanged while expectations inflate. When attention fades, the system collapses under its own weight. This is why virality without infrastructure is not just ineffective, it is dangerous. Real systems treat virality as optional, not essential. They do not rely on spikes. They rely on loops, feedback loops, improvement loops, reinvestment loops. These loops create predictability, and predictability is what allows scale to become sustainable rather than stressful. Most people misunderstand what successful systems do with virality. They imagine it as the engine. In reality, it is a catalyst. It accelerates what already exists. If the underlying system is weak, virality exposes weakness. If the system is strong, virality amplifies strength. The difference is invisible until pressure arrives. This is why waiting for a viral moment is such a costly strategy. It postpones responsibility. It delays system building. It keeps people focused on outcomes rather than processes. And it trains the mind to associate success with external validation rather than internal design. There is a deeper trap here as well. Virality encourages imitation. People study surface-level patterns, thumbnails, titles, trends, formats. They copy what looks successful without understanding why it worked. This creates crowded spaces filled with replicas that share appearance but lack structure. Over time, these environments become increasingly competitive and increasingly fragile. Systems thinkers behave differently. They are not obsessed with what went viral. They are obsessed with what repeated. They study retention, not reach. They analyze what compounds, not what spikes. They ask how each iteration improves the next, rather than how each post performs in isolation. Here is a subtle but important distinction. Virality is attention without memory. Systems create attention with continuity. One is a flash, the other is a current, and currents move things forward even when no one is watching. This is why some creators seem calm during growth while others panic. Calm creators built systems first. They know where attention flows next. They know how resources are reinvested. They know what happens when volume increases. And if panic comes from uncertainty, systems reduce uncertainty. As platforms mature and competition intensifies, reliance on virality becomes even more fragile. Algorithms change, formats shift, audiences evolve. What worked once stops working suddenly. Those who built only for spikes are forced to start over repeatedly. Those who built systems adapt. The real danger of the virality trap is not that people fail, it is that they mislearn. They conclude that success is random, that timing matters more than design, that effort is meaningless. These conclusions push people towards cynicism or burnout. Both are dead ends. In reality, success in modern systems is neither random nor effortless. It is structured, it is intentional, and it is repeatable for those willing to focus on architecture rather than applause. This brings us to the final illusion of this act, the belief that structure is optional, that systems are something you add later after success arrives. This belief is subtle, persistent, and incredibly costly. because systems added after growth must fight chaos. Systems built before growth shape it. The difference between those who survive scale and those who collapse under it is not resilience, it is preparation. And that preparation begins with understanding the invisible divide between effort and structure. Part 1, D. Structure versus effort, the invisible divide. At some point, usually after years of trying harder without moving forward, people begin to sense that something is wrong. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. They notice that effort no longer feels proportional to outcome, that more activity does not equal more progress, that staying busy has become a substitute for moving ahead. This is the moment where the invisible divide reveals itself, even if it is not yet understood. Most people live on the effort side of the divide. Their progress depends on presence, their income depends on availability, their momentum depends on constant motion. When they stop, everything stops. This creates a fragile relationship with work and money. Stability feels temporary, rest feels risky, and the future feels uncertain. That's even when things are going well. On the other side of the divide is structure. Structure does not ask how hard you work today. Structure asks whether it is functioning. A well-designed system produces outcomes regardless of mood, energy, or motivation. It does not require constant decision-making. It does not need emotional fuel. It simply runs. This is why structure feels almost unfair to those who do not understand it. It looks like less effort producing more result. It looks like people pulling ahead without visible strain. And because the system itself is invisible, observers assume something dishonest, lucky, or privileged must be happening. But what they are really seeing is leverage. Leverage is the ability to produce outcomes disproportionate to effort. It is the force that separates survival from accumulation. And effort multiplies output by addition. Structure multiplies output by exponentiation. Over time, the gap becomes so large that it feels like different games are being played. One of the reasons this divide is so difficult to cross is psychological. Effort is emotionally satisfying. It provides immediate feedback. You feel productive. You feel useful. Structure, on the other hand, feels slow at first. Designing systems often produces little visible progress. The payoff is delayed. And delayed rewards are uncomfortable for minds conditioned by instant feedback. This discomfort keeps people trapped. They return to effort because it feels like progress, even when it is not. They choose activity over architecture. They optimize execution instead of design. And over time, they become very good at running in place. And so another reason structure is misunderstood is that it does not announce itself. There is no dramatic moment where a system declares its presence. It grows quietly. It improves invisibly. It compounds slowly. And then suddenly, it becomes undeniable. By the time most people notice it, the gap is already too wide to close quickly. Structure also changes how decisions are made. On the effort side, decisions are reactive. People respond to urgency. They prioritize what is loudest, not what is most important. On the structure side, decisions are directional. They are made in advance. Systems absorb variability, so humans can focus on judgment rather than reaction. This is where freedom begins to appear, not as leisure, but as clarity. When systems handle repetition, the mind is freed for strategy. When structure replaces chaos, and our energy is conserved. And when leverage replaces effort, progress accelerates without burnout. Many people resist this idea because it feels impersonal. They want to believe success should reflect character, grit, and sacrifice. But systems do not care about identity. They care about design. This neutrality is uncomfortable, but it is also liberating because it means progress is not reserved for a special type of person. It is available to anyone willing to build differently. There is also a moral illusion tied to effort. Society often praises those who struggle visibly and ignores those who operate quietly. But outcomes are not distributed by moral approval. They are distributed by structure. And as systems become more complex and automated, this reality becomes impossible to ignore. Technology accelerates this divide, and automation removes the need for repeated effort. AI amplifies well-designed processes. Feedback loops tighten. Those with structure pull ahead faster. Those without it feel increasing pressure to work harder just to maintain position. This pressure is not personal. It is systemic. At this stage, a realization begins to form. If effort is fragile and structure is durable, then the real question is not how much you work, but what you're building. Not how busy you are, but what compounds when you step away. Not how impressive your activity looks, but how resilient your system is under stress. This realization is uncomfortable because it demands responsibility. You can no longer blame luck, talent, or timing. You must examine design. You must ask whether your actions feed a system or simply exhaust you. And you must accept that changing structure often requires slowing down before speeding up. But this discomfort is also the gateway, because once you see the divide clearly, you can no longer unsee it. You start noticing it everywhere. In businesses that scale smoothly versus those that collapse under growth. In individuals who remain calm during uncertainty versus those who panic. In systems that absorb shocks versus those that break. And now we arrive at the final realization of this act. Structure does not begin with money. It begins with how attention is captured, directed, and reinvested. Before systems can scale, they must be fed. Before leverage can compound, it must be fueled. That fuel is attention. And understanding how attention becomes the first asset is the final step in breaking the illusion completely. Part 1E. Attention AS, the first asset. Everything we have discussed so far leads to this point. Talent does not scale. Hard work plateaus. Virality destabilizes. Structure outperforms effort. But structure does not appear from nothing. It must be fed. And the fuel that feeds every modern system, whether visible or invisible, is attention. Most people think attention is something you receive. Likes, views, recognition, praise. They treat it as validation, something emotional, something personal. But systems do not care about validation. Systems care about input. And attention is the most powerful input in the modern economy because it can be transformed into almost anything else. Attention can become data. Data can become insight. Insight can become decisions. Decisions can become systems, and systems, once built, can run without you. This is why attention is not just valuable, it is foundational. The mistake most people make is spending attention instead of investing it. They scroll, they react, they consume. They let their focus be pulled outward by whatever is loudest or most urgent. Over time, their attention fuels other people's systems. Platforms grow, algorithms learn, businesses compound. Meanwhile, the individual feels busy but stagnant. This is not because they are weak or undisciplined. It is because they were never taught to treat attention as an asset. Assets are protected. Assets are allocated intentionally. Assets are expected to produce returns. Very few people do this with their focus. System builders do. They understand that where attention goes, energy flows. And where energy flows repeatedly, structure forms. This applies not just to media, but to learning, decision-making, and long-term direction. Attention is the gatekeeper of compounding. There is a subtle shift that happens when attention is treated as an asset rather than an emotion. People stop chasing stimulation and start designing flows. They stop asking what feels good now and start asking what builds capacity later. They become selective. And selectivity is the beginning of power. This is also why attention must be directed before it can be reinvested. Undirected attention scatters. Directed attention concentrates. Concentration creates pressure. And pressure, when applied correctly, creates transformation. Think about this in practical terms. When attention arrives at a system and nothing changes, it is wasted. When attention arrives and improves quality, speed, clarity, or reach, it compounds. The difference is not volume, it is intention. Most people never experience this compounding because they treat attention as disposable. They chase more without designing what happens next. They celebrate reach without building depth, and when attention fades, they are forced to start over. Systems thinkers behave differently. They assume attention is temporary unless anchored. They build mechanisms that capture it, process it, and convert it into something durable. Infrastructure, capability, insight, momentum. This is why attention alone never explains success. What matters is what attention activates. There is also an internal version of this process that is often overlooked. Internal attention determines what skills deepen, what ideas mature, and what strategies evolve. People who constantly fragment their focus struggle to build anything meaningful. People who protect and direct their attention compound learning faster. Over time, this advantage becomes enormous. This is where urgency enters the picture. In an AI-accelerated environment, attention is not just scarce. It is being competed for by increasingly intelligent systems. These systems are designed to capture, hold, and redirect focus. If you do not actively manage your attention, it will be managed for you. This is not a warning meant to create fear. It is a structural reality. Systems that capture attention will always outperform individuals who do not understand how attention flows. At this point, the illusion should be fully broken. Success is not random. It is not magical. It is not reserved for the gifted. It is the result of treating invisible forces seriously. Attention, structure, reinvestment, feedback. And now we reach the turning point of the story. Everything up to this moment has been about dismantling false explanations. What comes next is constructive. We move from illusion to mechanism, from misunderstanding to design, from observation to replication at the level of principle, not imitation. In the next part, we leave behind the myths entirely and step into the machine itself. We examine how reinvestment loops work, how time is compressed, and how systems begin to accelerate in ways that feel almost unnatural to those still operating on effort alone. Because once reinvestment is understood, progress stops feeling fragile.
Act 2, Editor. Part 2, ASOL. Attention as capital. The machine begins. At this stage, the conversation shifts. Everything before now is about removing illusions. This is where construction begins. Because once attention is understood as an asset, the next logical step is to treat it the same way serious people treat capital. Not emotionally, not impulsively, but strategically. Capital is not admired, it is deployed, it is measured, it is reinvested. And above all, it is expected to produce returns. When attention is treated this way, behavior changes immediately. People stop chasing noise and start designing pathways. They stop asking how to get more attention and start asking how attention moves. This distinction is subtle, but it separates amateurs from architects. Most people treat attention like income. They receive it, spend it, buy it, and move on. Systems treat attention like principle. It is preserved, multiplied, and redeployed with intention. Losing it unnecessarily is considered waste. Using it inefficiently is considered risk. Once attention becomes capital, randomness disappears. Not because outcomes are guaranteed, but because variance is reduced. Predictability increases. And predictability is what allows scale. This is where the machine begins to form. When attention enters a system designed for conversion, it does not simply pass through. It activates processes. Data is collected. Signals are analyzed. Performance is measured. Weak points are identified. Each cycle produces information that improves the next one. Over time, this creates a compounding advantage that looks like momentum from the outside, but feels like control from the inside. This is why large outcomes often appear sudden to observers. They do not see the internal optimization that preceded visible acceleration. They see the result, not the refinement. They see the output, not the feedback loop. Attention as capital also changes how time is perceived. Instead of chasing immediate payoff, systems optimize for long-term yield. Short-term gains are evaluated against their impact on future capacity. Decisions are filtered through a different lens, not does this perform now, but does this strengthen the system? This mindset is rare because it requires restraint. It requires passing on opportunities that look attractive but weaken structure. It requires delaying gratification in favor of durability. And it requires confidence in compounding rather than faith in luck. Here is where many people fail. They attempt to treat attention as capital without changing their behavior. They still chase validation. They still optimize for applause. They still measure success emotionally rather than structurally. And when results plateau, they conclude the strategy does not work. In reality, they never applied it. Treating attention as capital means designing sinks rather than spikes, places where attention accumulates rather than dissipates, assets that grow stronger with use rather than wear out, systems that remember, adapt, and improve. This applies far beyond content. Businesses that treat customer attention as disposable churn endlessly. Businesses that treat it as capital invest in experience, retention, and trust. Professionals who treat reputation as capital build leverage. Those who treat it as ego chase visibility without stability. Capital also demands accounting. Systems track where attention enters, where it leaks, and where it converts. Nothing important is left unmeasured, not to control people, but to understand flow. Understanding flow is what allows intelligent intervention. Once flow is understood, small adjustments produce large effects. Minor improvements in retention, slight increases in conversion, small reductions in friction. Over time, these marginal gains compound into dominance. This is why systems feel boring in the beginning and unstoppable later. There is also a psychological shift that occurs when attention is treated as capital. Emotional attachment decreases, decision quality improves, people become less reactive and more deliberate. They stop chasing what feels good and start prioritizing what works. This emotional detachment is often misunderstood as coldness or detachment from passion. In reality, it is clarity. Passion fuels effort, clarity fuels systems, and systems outlast emotion. As this machine begins to run, something interesting happens. Growth no longer feels chaotic. Pressure becomes manageable. Expansion feels controlled. Instead of being pulled forward by attention, the system pulls attention inward and directs it intentionally. This is the beginning of inevitability. But attention alone is not enough. Capital must be reinvested to compound. Leaving capital idle produces stagnation. Spending it carelessly produces volatility. The true power emerges when reinvestment becomes systematic rather than reactive. And this is where the next layer reveals itself. In the next part, we examine reinvestment loops, headed not as spending decisions, but as engines. Engines that compress time, reduce randomness, and allow systems to accelerate without increasing effort. Once reinvestment loops are understood, progress stops feeling fragile. Act 2, Part 2b, Reinvestment loops where time starts working for you. Once attention is treated as capital, the next question becomes unavoidable. What do you do with it after it arrives? Most people answer this unconsciously. They spend it, they enjoy it, they react to it, they let it pass. Systems do something very different. They reinvest it. And reinvestment is where growth stops being linear and starts becoming exponential. Reinvestment loops are not about spending more money. That is the shallow interpretation. Reinvestment loops are about feeding the system in a way that improves its future performance. Every cycle is designed to make the next cycle easier, faster, or more effective. This is the difference between progress that feels exhausting and progress that feels like momentum. Most people only reinvest financially, and even then, inconsistently. They make occasional upgrades, they buy tools, they hire help temporarily, but they do not design loops. Without loops, reinvestment remains episodic. An episodic improvement does not compound. A loop is different. A loop assumes repetition. It assumes that the same process will run again and again. Because of that assumption, it becomes worth optimizing. Small inefficiencies matter, minor delays matter, friction matters, and when friction is reduced, time begins to compress. Time compression is one of the most misunderstood advantages of systems. People assume progress always takes longer as complexity increases. In effort-based models, that is true. But in system-based models, complexity can actually accelerate output because learning accumulates. Each cycle teaches the system something, and each iteration carries memory forward. This is why experienced systems outperform beginners so dramatically, not because they work harder, but because their systems remember. Mistakes are not repeated, decisions improve, processes stabilize. Over time, variance shrinks, and when variance shrinks, predictability increases. Predictability is the hidden currency of scale. When outcomes become predictable, planning becomes possible. When planning becomes possible, reinvestment becomes strategic. And when reinvestment becomes strategic, growth accelerates without increasing stress. This is the point where effort begins to decouple from results. Most people never experience this because they do not stay in one loop long enough. They change direction too often. They chase novelty. They reset learning repeatedly. Each reset feels fresh. But it also discards accumulated intelligence. Progress restarts from zero again and again. Systems thinkers do the opposite. They stay with loops longer than feels comfortable. They allow boredom. They allow repetition. They understand that repetition is not stagnation when learning is embedded. Over time, the loop becomes refined. What once took weeks takes days. What once took days takes hours. This is time compression in action. There is also an emotional discipline required here. Reinvestment loops demand restraint. Not every dollar is extracted. Not every opportunity is maximized for short-term gain. Some resources are deliberately fed back into the system, even when immediate rewards are available. This restraint feels counterintuitive in a culture that glorifies consumption, but consumption does not compound. Capacity does. The most powerful reinvestments often look invisible from the outside, improving decision speed, reducing friction, enhancing feedback, increasing clarity. These do not signal success publicly, but they transform performance privately, and private performance always precedes public outcomes. Another critical aspect of reinvestment loops is that they reduce dependence on willpower. Systems do not rely on motivation, they rely on process. Once a loop is established, it runs whether you feel inspired or not. This removes emotional volatility from progress. Consistency becomes structural rather than personal. This is why reinvestment loops create a sense of calm, even during rapid growth. When systems improve automatically, there is less need for constant intervention. The builder moves from execution to oversight, from doing to deciding. And this shift changes everything. At this stage, many people ask a dangerous question. When do I extract value? When do I enjoy the rewards? This question is not wrong, but it is often premature. Extracting too early weakens loops. Draining capacity before it stabilizes introduces fragility. Systems need time to mature before they can safely distribute surplus. This patience is what most people lack, not intelligence or effort. They interrupt compounding by demanding results before the system is ready. They mistake slow beginnings for failure, and they abandon loops just before acceleration begins. Those who persist experience something different. They notice that progress feels less effortful over time. Decisions become clearer. Outcomes become more reliable. Stress decreases even as scale increases. And so this is the signature of a functioning reinvestment loop. Once multiple loops interact, the effect multiplies. Improvements in one area reinforce others. Speed improves quality. Quality improves retention. Retention improves data. Data improves decisions. Decisions improve systems. At this point, growth no longer depends on any single input. It becomes emergent. This is when observers begin to describe success as inevitable. They say things like, it just keeps growing, or it cannot be stopped. But inevitability is not magic. It is the result of layered reinvestment loops compounding over time. And yet, there is still another layer. Even well-designed loops can be slow if time is treated passively. The next acceleration comes from something more aggressive, something that feels almost unnatural at first. The deliberate compression of time itself. Asset 2, Part 2. C. Time compression. Why systems move faster than people. There comes a moment in every well-designed system where progress begins to feel unnatural, not chaotic, not frantic, but strangely accelerated. Outcomes that once took months now take weeks. Processes that once felt heavy now feel automatic. Decisions that once required long deliberation now happen almost instantly. This sensation is not luck, it is time compression, and it is one of the most powerful but least understood forces in modern wealth creation. Most people experience time as fixed. An hour is an hour, a year is a year. Progress, in their minds, must move at the same speed as the clock. This belief feels logical because effort is tied directly to time. More hours worked equals more output produced. But systems do not obey this rule. Systems change the relationship between time and outcome. When a system is poorly designed, time stretches. Simple tasks take longer. Decisions are delayed. Friction accumulates. Each new action feels heavier than the last. This is why effort-based work becomes exhausting over time. The system is leaking energy, and the human is compensating with willpower. Well-designed systems do the opposite. They shorten cycles. They remove unnecessary steps. They replace decision-making with predefined logic. Over time, the same outcome requires less time, less energy, and less attention. This is time compression. And once it begins, progress no longer feels linear. Time compression does not mean rushing. In fact, rushing often does the opposite. It introduces errors, increases rework, and creates instability. So true time compression comes from learning accumulation. Each cycle teaches the system something. Each mistake is recorded, not repeated. Each improvement becomes permanent. This is why repetition is so powerful in systems thinking. Repetition is not redundancy when learning is embedded. It is refinement. Every loop carries memory forward, and memory is what allows time to collapse. Consider the difference between doing something for the first time and the 100th time. The The first time requires attention, effort, and conscious thought. The 100th time feels almost automatic. Systems formalize this process. They turn experience into structure, and once experience is structured, it becomes reusable. Most people never reach this stage because they interrupt the process too early. They change direction when things feel slow. Yet they abandon loops when boredom appears. They mistake the early flat part of the curve for failure. In reality, the early phase of time compression is always quiet. This is why systems favor patience. They reward those who stay long enough for learning to stack. Once learning stacks, speed increases without additional effort. This is when people begin to say things like, "It suddenly took off," or "everything started clicking." But nothing was sudden. The acceleration was earned. Time compression also changes decision quality. When systems handle routine tasks, the human mind is freed from constant context switching. Focus deepens. Judgment sharpens. Decisions become clearer because they are no longer made under pressure. This clarity further accelerates progress, creating a reinforcing loop. There is also a psychological benefit that few people talk about. When time compresses, confidence increases. Not ego-driven confidence, but structural confidence. The system proves itself. Outcomes become predictable. Anxiety decreases. This emotional stability allows for better long-term decisions, which further strengthens the system. At this point, many people misunderstand what they are seeing. They assume the system builder has become smarter, more talented, or more disciplined. In reality, the system is doing most of the work. The human has moved from execution to direction, from effort to leverage. This is the stage where growth begins to look effortless from the outside. But it is only effortless because the effort was front-loaded into design. Most people do the opposite. They keep effort high and design low. As a result, our time never compresses. Progress always feels heavy. Technology amplifies time compression dramatically. Automation removes delay. AI reduces cognitive load. Feedback loops tighten. Systems learn faster. This is why the gap between those with systems and those without them is widening so quickly. Time is literally moving at different speeds for each group. Those operating without systems experience time as scarcity. There is never enough. Those operating with systems experience time as leverage. It multiplies their decisions. This difference is not philosophical. It is practical. It shows up in outcomes. As time compresses, something else happens. Scale becomes manageable. Growth no longer introduces chaos. It introduces clarity. More data improves decisions. More cycles improve performance. Instead of breaking under pressure, where the system thrives on it, this is the moment where inevitability begins to feel real. Not because success is guaranteed, but because the system is aligned with reality. It adapts, it improves, it compounds. And compounding does not need constant force. It needs direction. But even time compression has limits if feedback is not integrated correctly. Systems that move fast without feedback become fragile. Speed without correction leads to drift. This is why the next layer is critical. Feedback and scale must be integrated carefully, or acceleration turns into instability. Act 2, on Part 2D. Feedback and scale, why the system gets stronger under pressure. Speed alone does not create dominance. In fact, speed without correction is one of the fastest ways to collapse a system. What separates systems that thrive at scale from those that break is feedback. Feedback is the mechanism that tells a system whether it is aligned with reality or drifting away from it. And in modern environments, feedback is not optional. It is survival. Most people associate feedback with criticism, opinions, comments, praise, or negativity from others. But systems treat feedback differently. To a system, feedback is information. It is signal, not judgment. It does not ask how something feels. It asks whether something works. This distinction matters because emotional reactions distort learning. Systems that respond emotionally overcorrect or freeze. Systems that respond analytically adjust incrementally. Over time, those small adjustments compound into massive advantages. When scale increases, feedback becomes more abundant, more users, more data, more signals. For effort-based operators, this feels overwhelming. Too many inputs, too many opinions, too much noise. But for systems, scale is not a burden. It is a training environment. More scale means faster learning if the system is designed to listen correctly. This is why well-built systems improve under pressure. They do not resist stress, they metabolize it. Feedback loops work best when they are short. The faster a system learns whether an action worked, the faster it can adjust. Long feedback loops slow learning. Short feedback loops accelerate it. This is why iterative environments outperform static ones. Each cycle teaches the system something. Each correction reduces error. Over time, variance shrinks and reliability increases. Reliability is one of the most underestimated advantages of scale. People focus on growth numbers, but consistency is far more powerful. A system that produces predictable outcomes can be planned around. A system that produces random outcomes creates anxiety. Planning allows leverage. Anxiety consumes energy. As feedback integrates into the system, decision-making changes. Instead of guessing, the system references history. Instead of reacting, it anticipates. Instead of improvising constantly, it executes with confidence. This reduces cognitive load on the human operator and frees attention for strategy rather than survival. As this is also where scale stops being intimidating. Early on, growth feels dangerous because every increase amplifies mistakes. But once feedback is embedded, growth actually reduces risk. Errors are detected sooner. Patterns emerge faster. Weak points become obvious. Instead of hiding flaws, scale exposes them while there is still time to fix them. This is why large systems often feel calmer than small ones. They have more data, more context, more redundancy. Small systems rely on intuition. Large systems rely on information. Intuition is fragile. Information is scalable. There is a psychological shift that happens here as well. When feedback is trusted, ego relaxes. The system does not need to be defended. Mistakes are not personal failures, they are inputs. This emotional detachment increases learning speed dramatically. Systems that are defended emotionally stagnate. Systems that are evaluated objectively evolve. Many people fail at this stage because they misinterpret feedback. They chase vanity metrics instead of structural ones. They optimize for applause rather than retention. They respond to noise instead of signal. This creates the illusion of progress while weakening the system underneath. True feedback-driven systems prioritize a small number of critical signals. Signals that indicate health, not hype. Signals that reveal friction, not popularity. These signals guide reinvestment decisions and ensure that scale strengthens rather than destabilizes the machine. As feedback loops tighten, scale begins to create something powerful, self-correction. The system does not need constant oversight. It flags issues automatically. It adapts without drama. It improves quietly. This is where human involvement shifts again, from managing problems to setting direction. At this stage, growth stops feeling like a risk and starts feeling like validation. The system has proven that it can absorb complexity. It can handle volume. It can learn faster than the environment changes. This is a rare position to reach, and once reached, it creates a formidable advantage. Observers often mistake this stability for confidence or arrogance. They do not see the layers of feedback that make the system resilient. They assume the builder is fearless. In reality, the system is informed. Knowledge replaces fear. Data replaces anxiety. This is also the point where competition begins to fall away. Not because others disappear, but because they cannot keep up with the learning speed. Systems that learn faster dominate environments where change is constant, and modern environments change constantly. As feedback and scale reinforce each other, a tipping point is reached. The system begins to improve faster than external conditions can disrupt it. At that point, growth no longer depends on favorable circumstances. It becomes internally driven. This is when people begin to say things like, "it cannot be stopped," or "it is inevitable." They are not wrong, but inevitability is not magic. It is the result of feedback-informed scale compounding over time. There is only one final piece missing. Even the strongest systems can plateau if their direction is misaligned. Speed, reinvestment, and feedback create power, but power without direction can wander. Whereas the final layer ensures that everything points toward long-term dominance rather than short-term success. That layer is strategic intent. Act 2, PC, Part 2. Strategic intent, why the system becomes unstoppable. At this stage, the system is fast, adaptive, and resilient. Attention flows in predictably. Reinvestment loops strengthen capacity. Time compresses. Feedback sharpens performance. To an outside observer, this already looks like dominance, but without strategic intent, even powerful systems eventually drift. They grow, but not always in the right direction. They expand, but not always with purpose. And drift over long periods of time can quietly erode advantage. Strategic intent is what gives a system direction beyond short-term performance. It answers a question most people never ask clearly. What is this system ultimately designed to become? Not what does it do today, but what does it optimize for over time? Without this clarity, And systems respond to incentives blindly. They follow growth wherever it leads. And not all growth is healthy. Many systems collapse not because they fail to grow, but because they grow incoherently. They add complexity without alignment. They pursue opportunities that dilute focus. They respond to every signal rather than the right ones. Over time, they become bloated, slower, less precise. Strategic intent prevents this by acting as a filter. It determines which opportunities are pursued and which are ignored. This filtering effect is critical. In high-attention environments, opportunities are endless. Requests multiply. Options expand. Without a clear directional anchor, decision fatigue sets in, energy is spread thin, focus fragments. But when strategic intent is clear, decisions simplify. Alignment replaces hesitation. The system knows what it is building toward, and everything else becomes noise. Strategic intent also stabilizes reinvestment. Instead of reacting to short-term metrics, reinvestment decisions are evaluated based on long-term contribution. Does this strengthen the core? Does it increase durability? Does it improve learning speed? This perspective prevents short-term wins from undermining long-term power. This is where many people misinterpret discipline. They think discipline means doing more. In reality, discipline at this level means doing less, but with precision. It means saying no to growth that does not serve the system's direction. It means resisting the temptation to optimize for applause rather than architecture. As strategic intent solidifies, the system develops a distinct character, not personality, but coherence. Its actions align, its outputs reinforce each other. Its learning compounds in a single direction rather than scattering. This coherence is what makes systems feel inevitable. They do not zigzag, they advance. There is also a psychological benefit here. Strategic intent reduces anxiety. When direction is clear, uncertainty diminishes. Even setbacks are interpreted differently. They are not threats to identity or worth. They are information about alignment. This emotional stability allows for better decisions under pressure, which further strengthens the system. At this level, the human role changes again. Earlier, the builder moved from execution to oversight. Now the builder moves from oversight to stewardship. The system largely runs itself. The human ensures alignment. They protect direction. They intervene only when drift appears. This is a high leverage position because it preserves clarity without consuming energy. This is also why systems with strong strategic intent attract resources more easily. People trust coherence. Capital, talent, and attention flow towards systems that demonstrate direction. This creates another reinforcing loop. Alignment attracts resources. Resources strengthen alignment. Over time, the system becomes self-reinforcing. Observers often describe this stage as vision or leadership. Those words are not wrong, but they are incomplete. What they are really witnessing is structural alignment. The system's incentives, processes, and feedback loops all point in the same direction. There is no internal conflict, no competing priorities, no wasted motion. This is the point where the system stops depending on external conditions. All market shifts become opportunities rather than threats. Competition becomes irrelevant rather than intimidating because the system is not optimized for a single tactic. It is optimized for learning and adaptation within a clear direction. At this stage, dominance does not feel aggressive. It feels calm. There is no need to chase, no need to react impulsively. The system moves forward steadily, absorbing changes and converting them into advantage. This calmness is often mistaken for complacency. In reality, it is confidence earned through structure. This is what makes the system unstoppable. Not size, not speed, not fame, but alignment. Alignment between attention, reinvestment, feedback, time compression, and direction. When all of these elements reinforce each other, progress becomes self-sustaining. And now, having fully revealed the machine, we arrive at a critical transition. Understanding how the system works is powerful, but it is not enough. Knowledge without transfer changes nothing. The real question now is how this applies beyond a single example, how these principles can be used without fame, without massive audiences, and without extraordinary starting conditions. That is where the story turns outward. In the next act, we move from explanation to application, from observation to ownership, from understanding a system to building one of your own. Because the real value of this story is not what someone else built.
Act 3, Part 3a. You don't need fame, the most liberating realization. At this point in the story, many people quietly disqualify themselves. They understand the system intellectually, but they assume it only works at massive scale. They think it requires millions of viewers, global recognition, or extraordinary visibility. This assumption is understandable, but it is also the final illusion that keeps people from applying what they have learned. The truth is simple and deeply freeing. Fame is not the source of leverage. Systems are. Fame is just one way attention arrives. It is not the only way, and it is rarely the best way for long-term stability. Fame introduces volatility, scrutiny, and emotional pressure. Systems introduce predictability, leverage, and control. The mistake most people make is confusing visibility with power. Most wealth in the modern economy is not created by famous people. It is created by people who control processes, infrastructure, and decision-making behind the scenes. They are not recognized publicly, but they are indispensable structurally. Their systems operate quietly, consistently, and profitably, regardless of whether anyone knows their name. This is why understanding the underlying mechanics matters more than copying surface-level success. You do not need a massive audience to build feedback loops. You do not need millions of views to reinvest intelligently. You do not need virality to compress time. These principles apply at every scale. They simply become more visible at large scale. At small scale, systems still compound. The difference is subtle. A single workflow refined repeatedly. A single decision loop improved over time. A single source of attention converted into predictable outcomes. These small systems feel unimpressive at first, but they are foundational. They create learning velocity, and learning velocity is more important than starting size. This is where many people get trapped. They wait for scale before building systems. They tell themselves they will optimize later. But systems built after growth must fight chaos. Systems built before growth shape it. This is why early design matters more than early success. Another misconception is that systems require teams. People imagine complexity, layers of management, endless coordination. In reality, well-designed systems reduce the need for people. Automation replaces repetition, processes replace memory, AI replaces manual execution. The human role becomes strategic rather than operational. This is not about removing humans, it is about removing friction. When friction is removed, one person can do what once required many, not by working harder, but by working differently. This is why the most effective systems feel quiet. There is little drama, few emergencies. Progress is steady rather than explosive. This is also why system builders often appear less busy than those who rely on effort. They are not constantly reacting. Their time is protected. Their attention is focused. They spend more time thinking than doing. This is not laziness. It is leverage. A critical mindset shift happens here. People stop asking how to get more opportunities and start asking how to structure the ones they already have. They stop chasing novelty and start refining loops. Over time, this refinement produces a depth of understanding that outsiders mistake for genius. In reality, it is simply accumulated learning. There is also a moral relief in this realization. Success is no longer about being louder, faster, or more visible than others. It becomes about being more aligned, more intentional, more patient. This removes the constant comparison that drains energy and clarity. This is why systems thinking appeals to people at every stage of life. Younger individuals see it as a path to escape dependency. Older individuals see it as a way to preserve energy and focus. It respects time rather than consuming it. The most important takeaway here is that scale is not a prerequisite. It is a consequence. Systems create scale. Scale does not create systems. Reversing this order is one of the most common and costly mistakes people make. Once this is understood, the conversation changes. It moves away from admiration of someone else's success and toward design of one's own structure. It becomes less about imitation and more about application at the level of principle. And this sets the stage for the next layer. If you do not need fame, and you do not need a large team, then the real question becomes how systems are actually built in practice, how structure replaces effort, how automation replaces repetition. and how income begins to detach from constant presence.
Act 3, Part 3. B. Systems without employees, how structure replaces labour. Once people accept that fame is not required, another assumption quickly surfaces. The belief that meaningful systems require large teams, that scale demands headcount, that growth inevitably brings complexity, management, and coordination. This belief is understandable because it was true for much of history, but it is increasingly outdated in a world shaped by software, automation, and artificial intelligence. The modern system does not scale by adding people, it scales by reducing friction. Employees are often used to compensate for poorly designed processes. When information is scattered, people are hired to remember it. When workflows are inconsistent, people are hired to manage exceptions. When decisions are unclear, people are hired to coordinate. And over time, the organization grows, but clarity does not. Complexity increases faster than capability. Systems thinking reverses this dynamic. Instead of adding people to fix problems, it redesigns processes to eliminate them. Instead of relying on memory, it relies on structure. Instead of relying on supervision, it relies on automation. The result is a system that grows in output without growing in overhead. This is where the idea of zero-employee businesses becomes possible, not because work disappears, but because work is transformed. Repetitive tasks are automated, decision rules are codified, feedback is embedded. The human role shifts from execution to architecture. Architecture is a higher leverage activity than labor. When systems are designed correctly, they handle the predictable and escalate the exceptional. Most of daily work is predictable. It follows patterns, it repeats. These are exactly the conditions where automation excels. Humans, by contrast, are best at judgment, creativity, and strategy. Systems thinking aligns work with these strengths. Many people misunderstand automation as cold or impersonal. They imagine rigid processes that remove humanity. In reality, well-designed automation removes frustration. It eliminates delays. It reduces errors. It creates consistency. And consistency builds trust. This is why customers often prefer systems to human interaction for routine tasks. Systems respond instantly. They do not forget. They do not have bad days. They do not interpret instructions emotionally. This reliability frees humans to focus on what actually requires empathy and judgment. And so another reason systems without employees work is that they reduce coordination costs. Coordination is expensive. Meetings, miscommunication, delays, and misunderstandings consume enormous amounts of energy in traditional organizations. Systems replace coordination with logic. Logic does not argue, it executes. This does not mean systems are inflexible. In fact, the opposite is true. Because rules are explicit, they can be changed intentionally. Adjustments propagate instantly. Improvements apply everywhere at once. Learning scales automatically. One of the most powerful aspects of employee-light systems is that they create margin, financial margin, cognitive margin, time margin. Without payroll pressure, systems can reinvest aggressively. Without management overhead, attention remains focused. Without constant supervision, our decision quality improves. This margin is what allows compounding to take place. Systems that operate at the edge of capacity cannot reinvest. They're always reacting. Systems with margin can improve themselves. They can absorb shocks. They can experiment. Over time, this advantage becomes decisive. There is also a psychological shift for the builder. Without employees, responsibility becomes clearer. There is no diffusion of accountability. The system either works or it does not. This clarity accelerates learning. Problems are addressed structurally rather than emotionally. Many people avoid this approach because it feels lonely. They associate growth with teams and offices and visible activity. But visible activity is not the same as progress. Quiet systems often outperform loud organizations precisely because they conserve energy. This does not mean people are eliminated forever. It means people are added deliberately, only when their contribution multiplies the system rather than compensates for it. This restraint is rare but powerful. Systems without employees also adapt better to uncertainty. Economic shifts, technological changes, and market disruptions hit labor-heavy structures hardest. Fixed costs create fragility. Flexible systems absorb change. This resilience is not accidental, it is designed. At this point, the picture becomes clearer. Attention fuels systems. Reinvestment loops strengthen them. Time compression accelerates progress. Feedback refines performance. Strategic intent aligns direction. And minimal labor preserves margin. What emerges is a structure where income begins to detach from constant presence, where value is produced even when the builder steps back, where progress continues quietly, predictably, and sustainably. This is the threshold most people never cross. They remain trapped in effort-based loops because they never redesign the relationship between work and output. But once this threshold is crossed, something fundamental changes. Act 3, Tool Top, Part 3, C, From Income to Ownership, where wealth actually begins. At this point, the conversation changes tone, not because the ideas become more complex, but because they become more confronting. Up until now, we have talked about systems, leverage, automation, and structure. All of these can increase income, but income by itself is not wealth. And confusing the two is one of the most common reasons people work their entire lives without ever feeling secure. Income is movement. Wealth is position. Income arrives and leaves. It flows through accounts. It pays bills. It funds lifestyles. Wealth, on the other hand, stays. It accumulates. It compounds. It creates options. And the difference between the two is not how much you earn. It is how income is treated once it arrives. Most people experience income as relief. When money comes in, tension decreases, bills are paid, anxiety subsides, but this relief is temporary because the underlying structure has not changed. The moment income slows, pressure returns. This cycle trains people to chase higher income rather than redesign their system. This is why high earners can still feel fragile. Their income may be impressive, but it is not anchored. It depends on presence, performance, or continued effort. Remove any of those, and the system collapses. This fragility is not obvious during good times. It reveals itself during disruption. Ownership solves this. Ownership is not about titles or status. It is about control over systems that produce value. When you own a system, income becomes a byproduct rather than the objective. The system exists first. Revenue flows from it naturally. Second, because the system can outlive individual effort, stability increases. This is where many people struggle emotionally. Ownership feels slow at first. It requires restraint. Instead of extracting maximum income immediately, resources are reinvested. Instead of optimizing lifestyle, capacity is optimized. This delay feels uncomfortable in a culture trained to equate success with visible consumption. But this delay is precisely where wealth is built. Ownership also changes how decisions are made. Instead of asking how much money something will make this month, the question becomes how it strengthens the system over years. Short-term gains that weaken structure are avoided. Long-term gains that feel modest initially are prioritized. This is not conservative thinking, it is compounding thinking. Compounding does not reward intensity. It rewards consistency and alignment. Small advantages, applied repeatedly, produce exponential outcomes, but only if they are left undisturbed long enough. This is why ownership requires patience. Interrupting compounding resets progress. There is a psychological shift that happens when people move from income to ownership. They stop reacting to fluctuations. They stop making emotional decisions based on short-term outcomes. They begin to think in trajectories rather than moments. This perspective reduces stress and improves judgment simultaneously. Ownership also introduces optionality. When income is tied to effort, options are limited. You must say yes. You must show up. You must continue. When systems produce income, options expand. You can say no, you can pause, you can redirect attention. This optionality is one of the clearest signals of real wealth. Most people underestimate how powerful this is. They assume wealth is about luxury. In reality, wealth is about choice, the ability to choose where to focus, when to engage, and what to ignore. Systems create this freedom quietly, without drama. Another important distinction emerges here. Ownership is not about hoarding. It is about stewardship. Systems must be maintained, refined, and protected. Neglect causes decay. Over-extraction causes fragility. Sustainable ownership balances use and reinvestment continuously. This balance is where maturity appears. People stop chasing peaks and start building plateaus. Instead of volatile spikes of success followed by burnout, they aim for steady elevation. This approach feels less exciting in the short term, but far more powerful over time. This is also why many people never reach ownership. It requires turning down immediate gratification. It requires trusting systems before they are obvious. It requires resisting social pressure to display success prematurely. These are emotional challenges, not technical ones, but once crossed, the threshold is permanent. People who have experienced ownership rarely return willingly to pure effort-based income. They understand too clearly how fragile it is. Even if they engage in effort again, it is by choice, not necessity. At this stage, a deeper question arises. If ownership creates stability and optionality, why do so many people fail to build it even when they understand the concept? The answer lies not in knowledge but in psychology, specifically in how people relate to time, patience, and delayed reward. This brings us to the final layer of this act, the silent divide that separates those who compound quietly from those who remain trapped in constant motion. A divide that is invisible at first but decisive over decades. Act 3, condition. Part 3, D, the silent divide, why some compound and most don't. By this point, the mechanics are clear. Systems create leverage, ownership creates stability, compounding creates freedom, and yet, despite access to the same tools, information, and opportunities, most people never cross into this territory. They remain active, intelligent, and hardworking, but structurally stuck. The reason is not ignorance. It is something quieter and more persistent. It is psychology. There is a silent divide that forms early in adult life, long before outcomes are visible. On one side are people who orient their decisions around immediacy. On the other are people who orient their decisions around trajectory. This difference is subtle at first. In the early years, both groups may look similar. They earn comparable incomes. Once they experience similar pressures, they appear to be moving forward at roughly the same pace. But beneath the surface, something very different is happening. Those who focus on immediacy optimize for relief. They reduce discomfort quickly. They spend when tension appears. They change direction when boredom sets in. They abandon systems when progress feels slow. None of this feels irrational in the moment. In fact, it feels sensible. The problem is that these decisions interrupt compounding repeatedly. Compounding is fragile in the beginning. It requires uninterrupted time to take effect. And most people unknowingly disrupt it over and over again, not because they are careless, but because they are human. Humans are wired to respond to short-term signals. Anxiety feels urgent. Pleasure feels validating. Stillness feels unproductive. To systems thinking asks people to override these instincts, and that is difficult. On the other side of the divide are people who build tolerance for delay. They expect boredom. They anticipate slow beginnings. They understand that early progress is often invisible. This expectation protects them from emotional overreaction. They do not abandon systems prematurely. They refine instead of resetting. Over time, this patience compounds into advantage. The most dangerous misunderstanding about compounding is that it is purely financial. In reality, compounding is behavioral. It applies to skills, relationships, decision-making, and systems. Small advantages, applied consistently, produce exponential differences over time, but only if they are allowed to persist. This is why the silent divide is not obvious in the short term. All compounding looks unimpressive early on. Effort-based progress often outpaces it initially. This creates a deceptive comparison. People see others moving faster and assume they are falling behind. In response, they abandon structure and return to effort. The cycle repeats. Years later, the outcomes diverge dramatically. Those who stayed with compounding systems experience acceleration. Those who chased immediacy experience fatigue. The gap feels sudden, but it was earned quietly over time. Another factor in this divide is how people interpret risk. Most people associate risk with action. They believe trying something new is risky, while maintaining the status quo is safe. But in a rapidly changing environment, the opposite is often true. Standing still is risky because it increases dependency. Dependency on a single income source. Dependency on a single skill set. Dependency on a single structure that may not endure. Systems reduce dependency. They diversify exposure. They create buffers. They allow adjustment without collapse. People who understand this accept short-term uncertainty in exchange for long-term resilience. People who do not remain dependent and fragile, even when things appear stable. There is also a social dimension to the silent divide. Society rewards visible effort. People praise busyness. They admire struggle. They applaud hustle. Quiet system building often goes unnoticed. This creates social pressure to perform effort rather than design structure. Resisting this pressure requires internal conviction rather than external validation. This is why many people feel alone during the compounding phase. Progress is not obvious. Whilst there is little applause, results are delayed. Without a clear internal framework, doubt creeps in. This doubt causes people to abandon the very behaviors that would have paid off if left uninterrupted. Those who cross the divide do something different. They anchor their confidence internally. They measure progress structurally rather than emotionally. They track learning, efficiency, and alignment rather than applause. This internal measurement system allows them to persist when external feedback is quiet. Over time, this persistence creates calm. Decisions become less reactive, focus deepens, the noise fades, and when compounding finally becomes visible, it feels almost anticlimactic. The system simply works. The income flows predictably. Options expand, stress decreases. This is the moment many people describe as freedom. But freedom did not arrive suddenly. It was built slowly through discipline, restraint, and patience. The visible outcome is merely the final expression of years of invisible design. At this stage, it becomes clear why so many people never escape the money cycle. They are not lazy. They are not incapable. They are simply trapped in patterns that reward immediacy and punish patience. Breaking free requires a shift in how time, effort, and reward are understood. And this realization brings us to the final act. Because understanding systems and psychology is only half the equation. The final transformation happens when income generated by systems is directed intelligently over long periods of time, when cash flow feeds assets, when assets compound quietly, and when time becomes an ally rather than an enemy.
Act IV, Part 4a. Compounding, the final skill that changes everything. If you have stayed with this story until now, something subtle but important should feel different. Not excitement, not motivation, but clarity. Because by this point it should be obvious that wealth is not primarily about how much you earn. It is about what happens to value after it is created. And the force that determines whether value disappears or multiplies is compounding. Compounding is often explained with charts and formulas, but its true power is psychological. Compounding rewards behaviors most people avoid. Patience, consistency, delayed gratification, trust in process over appearance. This is why compounding feels boring in the beginning and miraculous at the end. It moves quietly at first, almost imperceptibly, and then accelerates beyond intuition. Most people never benefit from compounding because they interrupt it. They extract too early. They change direction too often. They react emotionally to short-term fluctuations. They mistake motion for progress. Compounding requires stillness at the right moments. It requires allowing systems to operate without constant interference. There is an important distinction that must be made here. Compounding does not mean doing nothing. It means doing the right things once, and then allowing time to amplify them. This is why compounding is the natural partner of systems. Systems produce repeatable outcomes. Compounding multiplies them. When income is generated through effort alone, compounding is difficult. Income fluctuates. Decisions become reactive. Surplus disappears quickly. But when income is generated by systems, something changes. Cash flow becomes predictable. Predictability allows planning. Planning allows intentional allocation. And intentional allocation is where compounding begins. This is the moment where many people make a critical mistake. They assume compounding requires large amounts of money. It does not. It requires consistency. Small amounts, allocated repeatedly, compound faster than large amounts applied sporadically. The size of the input matters far less than the regularity and discipline of the process. This is why high earners often fail to build wealth, while moderate earners sometimes succeed. The difference is not income, it is structure. High income without structure leaks. Moderate income with structure compounds. Over time, the outcome diverges dramatically. Compounding also changes how time is experienced. For people trapped in effort-based income, time feels like an enemy. Each year brings pressure. Aging feels threatening. Energy declines create anxiety. For people who compound, time becomes an ally. Each year strengthens their position. Experience accumulates. Systems mature. Decisions improve. This psychological shift is profound. It reduces fear. It increases patience. It allows long-term thinking. People stop obsessing over short-term volatility because they understand trajectory. They know where they are headed, even if progress is not immediately visible. Another misunderstood aspect of compounding is that it applies beyond money. Skills compound. Relationships compound. Reputation compounds. Decision quality compounds. When systems are designed to improve learning and judgment, the human behind the system compounds as well. This creates a reinforcing loop between personal growth and structural growth. This is why compounding is not just a financial strategy. It is a lifestyle orientation. It influences how people allocate attention, energy, and time. It encourages simplicity. It rewards focus. It punishes distraction. Over time, it produces lives that feel calmer, more deliberate, and more resilient. There is also a moral neutrality to compounding that makes people uncomfortable. Compounding does not care about intent. It amplifies whatever is fed into it. Good systems compound into strength. Bad habits compound into fragility. This is why early design matters so much. Compounding magnifies structure, not effort. At this stage, many people experience a mix of excitement and regret. Excitement because the path forward feels clearer. Regret because they realize how much time was spent chasing noise instead of building structure. This emotional response is natural, but regret is only useful if it leads to realignment rather than paralysis. The most important thing to understand about compounding is that it is always available. The curve does not care when you start, it only cares that you start and that you persist. The past cannot be changed, but the future compounds regardless. This brings us to the final transition. Everything discussed so far has been about understanding how systems create income and how compounding turns income into wealth. The final step is about direction. Where compounding is pointed, what it feeds, and how small, disciplined decisions made consistently can reshape an entire financial future.
Seat 4, Part 4b, Wealth Psychology and Long-Term Systems Thinking. By now it should be clear that wealth is not built by intensity. It is built by alignment between behavior, structure, time, and psychology. And this is where most people fail, not because they lack information, but because they misunderstand themselves. Human psychology is optimized for survival, not for compounding. The brain is designed to react to immediate threats and rewards. Urgency feels real. Delayed outcomes feel abstract. This mismatch creates friction when people attempt to build long-term systems. They know what to do intellectually, but emotionally, they feel pulled in the opposite direction. This is why wealth psychology matters more than tactics. Without the right internal framework, even the best systems are sabotaged from within. Or people interfere when they should wait. They extract when they should reinvest. They change direction when they should refine. These behaviors are not random. They are emotional responses to uncertainty. Long-term thinkers train themselves to interpret uncertainty differently. Instead of seeing it as danger, they see it as part of the process. They expect ambiguity early on. They anticipate slow feedback. This expectation prevents panic. Panic is the enemy of compounding. There is a critical mental shift that separates those who build wealth from those who merely earn money. Earners focus on outcomes. Builders focus on processes. Outcomes fluctuate. Processes endure. When attention is fixed on outcomes, emotional volatility increases. When attention is fixed on processes, stability emerges. This is why wealthy individuals appear calm during market shifts, technological disruption, or economic uncertainty. They are not indifferent. They are insulated by structure. Their systems absorb shocks. Their income is diversified. Their decision-making is not forced by urgency. Another key psychological trait is comfort with invisibility. Compounding often happens quietly. There are long periods where progress is internal rather than visible. Most people struggle here because they seek validation. They want proof that their effort is working. Systems thinkers learn to validate internally. They track leading indicators rather than applause. This internal validation allows patience, and patience allows compounding. There is also an important shift in how time is valued. Most people sell time. They trade hours for income. This conditions them to see time as something to be filled. Builders see time as something to be protected. Empty time is not wasted. It is reserved for thinking, refining, and designing. This is why wealthy systems often look simple from the outside. Complexity is pushed into structure, not into daily life. Decisions are pre-made. Defaults are intentional. Friction is reduced. This simplicity is not accidental. It is engineered. Another psychological distinction lies in how people respond to boredom. Boredom is one of the most dangerous moments in compounding. When systems are working but progress feels slow, boredom tempts people to interfere, to optimize prematurely, to chase novelty. Long-term thinkers recognize boredom as a signal that the system is stable. They resist the urge to disrupt it. This resistance is rare, and rarity compounds. There is also a misconception that wealth psychology requires extreme discipline or denial. In reality, it requires clarity. When direction is clear, sacrifice feels temporary rather than permanent. When systems are aligned, restraint feels purposeful rather than restrictive. This clarity reduces cognitive load. Decisions become simpler. Fewer choices matter. Most noise is ignored. Over time, this mental simplicity becomes one of the greatest luxuries wealth provides. Another subtle but powerful shift is how wealthy individuals define success. They do not define it as income alone. They define it as optionality, the ability to choose where to focus attention, the ability to say no without fear, the ability to step back without collapse. Optionality is the ultimate output of compounding systems. At this stage, and it becomes obvious why tactics alone never work. Tools change, platforms evolve, strategies expire, but psychology endures. Those who master systems thinking and compounding behavior adapt effortlessly. Those who chase tactics are constantly starting over. This is why the journey does not end with understanding AI, automation, or business models. Those are entry points. The real transformation happens when income becomes structured, structure becomes automated, and automation is left undisturbed long enough to compound. That is the quiet path to wealth. Not dramatic, not flashy, but resilient. And now we arrive at the final moment, because understanding is only valuable if it leads to action, and action must be directed somewhere. The last step is not another concept, it is an invitation. And an invitation to continue the trajectory while momentum is high and clarity is fresh.
Act IV, Part 4C. The quiet ending from clarity to confidence. If you have stayed until this moment, understand something important. You are no longer watching this video for information. You are here for confirmation. Confirmation that what you have felt for a long time was not confusion, laziness, or lack of discipline, but misalignment. Most people spend their lives inside motion without direction. They work, they earn, they spend, they repeat, and because movement feels productive, they assume progress is happening. But progress without structure is fragile. It collapses under pressure. It disappears during disruption. And it leaves people wondering why decades of effort did not translate into freedom. This video was never about copying a person, a platform, or a business model. It was about revealing a pattern that repeats across industries, technologies, and generations. A pattern where systems outperform effort, where structure outlives motivation, and where patience quietly defeats urgency. Nothing here required extraordinary intelligence. Nothing required luck. Nothing required fame. What it required was a different relationship with time. Time is the one variable most people underestimate. They think in weeks and months, while wealth compounds in years and decades. They expect visible progress quickly, and when it does not appear, they change direction. This constant resetting keeps them permanently early in the curve. Those who escape the money cycle do something deceptively simple. They stop interrupting compounding. They build systems that generate predictable cash flow. They reinvest that cash flow instead of consuming it. They allow learning to accumulate. They reduce emotional decision-making. And they give time permission to work. This is why wealth often looks boring from the outside. There are no dramatic moves, no constant reinvention, no frantic chasing of trends. Just quiet consistency. Systems running, decisions improving, optionality expanding. Freedom is not created in moments of urgency. It is created in periods of patience. By now, you should see that artificial intelligence, automation, and modern tools are not shortcuts. They are amplifiers. They magnify whatever structure you feed them. Without systems, they increase chaos. With systems, they accelerate compounding. This is the fork in the road most people never recognize. One path continues exactly as before. More effort, more motion, more stress. Slightly higher income, but the same fragility underneath. The other path is quieter. It requires restraint. It requires delayed gratification. It requires trusting systems before they are impressive. But over time, it leads somewhere very different. Toward stability, toward optionality, toward a life where money becomes a tool instead of a constant concern. That path begins with one question. Not how do I make more money, but how do I design systems that make money irrelevant to my daily survival? Everything you have heard up to this point was meant to prepare you for that question. The next step is not motivation, it is direction. Because once income is automated, the real challenge begins. How that income is allocated, how it is protected, how it is compounded quietly over time. That is the skill that ultimately separates earners from owners and owners from the truly free. That is why the next video matters. The video on your screen is not about theory. It is not about hype. It is about the power of compounding explained in practical, real-world terms. How small, disciplined decisions made consistently reshape entire financial futures. How time becomes an ally instead of an enemy. And how ordinary people quietly build extraordinary stability by letting systems run. If this video gave you clarity, do not let that clarity fade. Momentum is fragile. Understanding must be acted on while it is fresh. Click the video on your screen now. Let the ideas connect. Let the system complete itself. Income gives you options. Systems give you stability. Compounding gives you freedom. And freedom is never rushed. It is built quietly, patiently, and deliberately by those who finally understand how leverage truly works.